"We're selling the house." The words, spoken by my mother, sliced through the comfortable Sunday dinner chatter like a heated knife through warm butter. I nearly choked on a piece of roasted chicken, the herb-infused bite turning to ash in my mouth. Across the polished mahogany table, my father nodded in placid agreement, his fork pausing midair as if this were the most reasonable, ordinary decision in the world. My brother, Tyler, sitting across from me with his perfectly manicured fiancée, Jessica, beamed as if he'd just won the lottery. His smile was so wide it seemed to strain the muscles in his handsome face. "For Tyler's wedding, of course," my mother added, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin, a gesture of practiced elegance that suddenly felt like a calculated performance. "You're what?" I managed to croak, setting down my fork with hands that had begun to tremble. The weight of the silver felt impossibly heavy. "The Morrison family estate," my mother continued, her voice smooth and untroubled. "Tyler and Jessica deserve a fairy tale wedding, Rooney. And we want to give them the best start possible. The house should cover the cost beautifully." The Morrison family estate. Our home. The sprawling colonial-style house where I'd taken my first steps, scraped my knees, and hidden from thunderstorms under the grand staircase. The house whose every creak and groan was as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. My mind reeled. They were selling my entire childhood to fund a party. "My name is Rooney Thompson. I'm 35 years old, and for the last decade, I've worked as a senior marketing coordinator for Brightvale Mining in Birmingham, Alabama. It's a stable, demanding career that I built from the ground up, brick by painstaking brick. I've spent my entire adult life watching my parents bend over backward for my younger brother. But this was beyond anything I could have ever imagined." I stared at them, my family, their faces alight with a shared, feverish excitement that I was pointedly excluded from. They were a closed circle, and I was on the outside, looking in at the bonfire of our shared history. "Where will you live?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. A cold, sinking feeling coiled in my gut. I already knew the answer, but some masochistic part of me needed to hear them say it. My father cleared his throat, a sound he always made before delivering news he knew I wouldn't like. "Well, we figured we could stay with you, temporarily. Just until we find something suitable." Temporarily. I repeated the word in my head, the syllables tasting like poison on my tongue. The word was a flimsy veil for a reality I knew all too well. Temporarily, in my family's vocabulary, was a fluid concept, often stretching into an indefinite, soul-crushing permanence. Tyler leaned forward eagerly, his eyes sparkling. "Rooney, you should see the venue Jessica found. It's this incredible mansion with gardens and a ballroom. The whole thing will be like a movie." Jessica, ever the supportive fiancée, nodded enthusiastically, her massive engagement ring catching the light and flashing a tiny, sharp rainbow across the room. "We're thinking 200 guests," she gushed, "maybe more. A live orchestra, professional photographers, the works." I stared at them, trying to process the sheer magnitude of what they were asking, what they were taking. My parents had raised me in that house. Every single childhood memory I cherished was tied to those walls, that garden, the creaky stairs I'd climbed thousands of times. I had spent years saving every penny I could, living in a modest two-bedroom apartment, precisely because I knew that someday my parents might need help in their old age. I had a savings account earmarked for that very purpose. I just never, in my wildest nightmares, imagined they would sell their security, our shared heritage, for a party. How much are we talking about?" I asked quietly, my gaze fixed on a scratch in the tabletop. "The wedding will cost around $80,000, my mother said, a note of pride in her voice that made my blood run cold. "Nothing but the best for our Tyler." $80,000 for one day. While I was carefully budgeting for a future that included their potential care, they were planning to liquidate their biggest asset for a fleeting celebration. "And you've already decided this?" I asked, a new sharp edge to my voice. "Of course," my father said, finally looking at me, his expression a mixture of paternal authority and mild impatience. "Family comes first, Rooney. You understand that?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement. A decree. I was the responsible one, the dependable daughter. It was my role to understand, to accommodate, to sacrifice. I forced a tight, brittle smile and nodded, but inside, a cold realization was settling in. They hadn't asked for my opinion. They hadn't even truly informed me. They had simply assumed I would go along with their plan, just like I always had. But this time felt different. This time, I sensed a tectonic plate shifting deep within me. A quiet, insistent voice was whispering that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop being the dependable daughter who never caused waves. Growing up, I'd always been the responsible one. While Tyler was playing video games or hanging out with friends, I was helping my mother with household chores and maintaining perfect grades. My parents called me their little adult and praised my maturity. Looking back now, I realized I'd never really had a choice. Tyler was 5 years younger than me, and from the moment he could walk, my parents treated him like he was spun from gold. When he struggled in school, they hired tutors. When he wanted to play expensive sports, they bought all the equipment without a second thought. When he crashed his first car at 17, a beat-up sedan I'd helped him buy with my own part-time job savings, they bought him a brand new one the next week. Meanwhile, I paid for my own college education through a patchwork of scholarships and grueling part-time jobs. I moved out at 22 and had been financially independent ever since. Not once had my parents offered to help with my student loans or my apartment deposit. "Rooney can handle herself," they'd always said, as if my competence somehow disqualified me from their support. The breaking point came with a series of small, escalating invasions. First, my father called. "Rooney, honey, the buyers want to do an inspection, and it would be easier if some of our things were out of the way. Would you mind if we brought a few boxes over to your place this weekend?" A few boxes turned into half their living room furniture, stacks of sentimental clutter, and a mountain of clothing. My meticulously organized apartment, my sanctuary, was suddenly shrinking, crowded with the ghosts of their past. "Where will you sleep?" I asked my mother as they wedged a large, antique armchair into my small living room, blocking the path to the balcony. "Oh, we'll make do with the spare room. It'll be cozy," she chirped, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Cozy wasn't the word I'd use. Suffocating was more like it. A week later, the financial requests began. "Rooney," my mother said over the phone, her voice laced with a practiced, casual sweetness, "Tyler's so stressed about everything. This wedding needs to be perfect. He's our only son, and Jessica's family has such high standards." That was news to me. Every time I'd met Jessica's parents, they seemed like perfectly reasonable, middle-class people. They weren't the ones demanding an $80,000 wedding. "What about after the wedding?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Have you looked at any apartments?" There was a pregnant pause. "Well, we thought we might stay here a little longer," my father said, his voice hesitant. "The wedding expenses have eaten into our down payment fund." "How much longer?" I pressed. "Maybe 6 months? Just until we get back on our feet." 6 months. I felt something inside me snap. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never allowed myself to feel before. Anger. Real, deep, burning anger at the unfairness of it all. I'd been the good daughter for 35 years. Maybe it was time to try something different. But I wasn't ready to act on that anger just yet. Instead, I smiled and began to plan. The following Saturday morning, my doorbell rang at 8 a.m. sharp. I opened it to find my parents standing there with enough suitcases and boxes to outfit a small army. "Surprise," my mother chirped, pushing past me with an armload of hanging clothes. "We thought we'd get an early start." My father followed with a stack of boxes labeled kitchen essentials, bedroom items, and important papers. Behind them, Tyler was unloading even more boxes from his truck. "I thought you said just some clothes and personal items," I said, watching in horror as they began colonizing my living space. "Well, we got a little carried away," my mother admitted, hanging her clothes in my coat closet. "But this is so exciting. It'll be like old times." I highly doubted that. Old times hadn't involved sharing a bathroom with my parents or having my mother rearrange my kitchen because she didn't approve of my organizational system. Within 2 hours, my apartment was unrecognizable. My mother had taken over the kitchen, reorganizing my cabinets and declaring that my coffee maker was inadequate for 3 adults. My father had claimed my home office as his temporary command center, spreading his paperwork across my desk and connecting his ancient computer to my internet. "Where am I supposed to work?" I asked, staring at my displaced laptop. "You can use the kitchen table," my mother suggested cheerfully. "It'll be cozier." By noon, I felt like a stranger in my own home. My parents had settled in with the confidence of people who never doubted their welcome. The final straw came a few days later. "The caterer needs a deposit by tomorrow," my mother announced one Tuesday evening as I tried to eat my dinner in peace. "It's only another $3,000. "Only?" I repeated, setting down my fork. "Mom, you said the house sale was covering everything." "It is mostly," she said quickly. "But there are some extra costs we hadn't planned for. The flowers alone are running $1,500 more than we expected." I took a deep breath. "I don't have $3,000 to spare, Mom." "Rooney, why are you being so difficult about this?" Her voice sharpened. "I'm not being difficult. I'm asking reasonable questions about my own living situation." My mother sat down on my bed, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she looked tired. "The truth is," she confessed, "we spent more on the wedding than we planned. And with the house selling for less than we expected, we don't have enough left over for a proper place." The original offer of $130,000 had been renegotiated down to $110,000 after the inspection revealed issues with the foundation and the roof. "How much do you have left?" I asked. "After all the wedding expenses, maybe $15,000.
$15,000.
In Birmingham, that might cover a security deposit and a few months' rent, but not much more. Certainly not enough to furnish a new place or handle unexpected expenses." "So your plan is to live with me indefinitely?" I said, the statement hanging in the air. "Just until we figure something else out." I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and realized that for the first time in my adult life, I was seeing her clearly. She wasn't the selfless family matriarch I'd always believed her to be. She was someone who'd made impulsive, financially irresponsible decisions and expected other people to clean up the mess. It was time to stop cleaning up messes that weren't mine to fix. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before in my entire relationship with my family. I took control. I started by calling my landlord, Mr. Peterson, and explaining the situation honestly. As I'd suspected, having unauthorized long-term guests was a violation of my lease agreement. He gave me 2 options: add my parents to the lease, which would come with an additional deposit and increased rent, or have them out within 30 days. "I'll need them out," I told him, a strange sense of calm washing over me. Next, I called the bank and put a freeze on any further withdrawals from my savings account. I'd already lent my parents $10,000. I wasn't going to be their unlimited ATM anymore. Then I made the hardest call of all. "Tyler," I said when he answered, "we need to talk." "Sure, what's up?" "I need Mom and Dad out of my apartment by next Friday." Silence. "Then, what do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. My landlord has informed me that having long-term guests violates my lease. They need to find somewhere else to stay." "But the wedding is in 2 weeks." "I know when the wedding is. That doesn't change my lease agreement." "Rooney, you can't do this. Where are they supposed to go?" I took a deep breath, the anger I'd been suppressing for weeks finally finding its voice. "Tyler, I've supported this wedding financially and logistically for months. I've given up my home, my privacy, and my savings. I've done my part." "But there are parents." "Yes, they are. They're your parents, too. Figure it out. You're being incredibly selfish, Tyler said, his voice rising. This is the most important day of my life. And every day is important in mine, I replied calmly. I won't be guilted into giving up my entire life for your wedding anymore. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt something I hadn't felt in months: relief. The reaction was swift and predictable. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with angry calls and texts from my parents, Tyler, and even Jessica. My mother showed up at my office that afternoon, tears streaming down her face. How could you do this to us? She demanded. We're family. Family doesn't mean I have to sacrifice everything for everyone else's choices, I replied quietly. What are we supposed to do? We have nowhere to go. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. Inside were printouts of available rental apartments in Birmingham, along with contact information for temporary housing services and extended stay hotels. Here, I said, handing her the folder. I've done some research. There are several options that would work within your budget. She stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Rooney, we can't afford any of these, not with the wedding expenses. Then maybe the wedding expenses need to be reconsidered. The words hung in the air between us. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I'd said what we were both thinking, that maybe an $80,000 wedding wasn't worth making the entire family financially unstable. You want us to cancel Tyler's wedding? My mother asked, her voice barely a whisper. I want you to make adult decisions about your finances and stop expecting me to fix the consequences, I said firmly. You chose to sell your house for this wedding. You chose to spend beyond your means. Those were your choices, not mine. My mother looked at me as if she was seeing me for the first time. I don't know who you've become, she said finally. I've become someone who values herself enough to set boundaries, I replied. It's long overdue. She left without another word, and I knew the real battle was just beginning. The following week was a whirlwind of family drama that I watched unfold from a safe distance. Tyler called me daily, alternating between anger and pleading. Jessica's parents, apparently sensing the financial instability, began asking pointed questions about the wedding budget. My parents, faced with the reality of finding new housing with limited funds, finally started making practical decisions. They found a small, furnished apartment in a less expensive part of town, using most of their remaining savings for the deposit and first month's rent. The bridal shower was moved to Jessica's aunt's house. Several wedding expenses were cut, including the live orchestra and the elaborate flower arrangements. Tyler was furious, but he had a choice: scale back the wedding or find another family member willing to bankroll his dreams. Since I was the only one with both the means and the previous willingness to help, and I was no longer playing that role, reality set in quickly. The most telling moment came when my father called me 3 days before the wedding. Rooney, he said, his voice weary, I owe you an apology. For what, specifically? For taking advantage of your generosity. For assuming you'd always be there to fix our mistakes. For not respecting your space and your life. I was quiet for a moment, processing words I'd never expected to hear from him. Thank you, I said finally. That means a lot. The wedding is still happening, he continued. It'll be smaller, simpler, but it'll be nice. And we'll manage on our own afterward. I'm glad to hear that. Are you still coming? I'd been wondering about that myself. Part of me wanted to skip it entirely, to make a statement about how their treatment had affected me. But another part of me, the part that still loved my brother despite everything, wanted to be there for his actual moment of happiness. Yes, I said. I'll be there. The wedding day arrived with typical June weather in Birmingham, hot and humid, with afternoon thunderstorms threatened. The venue was still beautiful, just smaller than originally planned. Tyler looked handsome in his tuxedo, and Jessica was radiant in her $3,000 dress. During the ceremony, I found myself thinking about family and sacrifice and the difference between supporting people you love and enabling their poor decisions. I'd spent so many years believing that love meant saying yes to everything, that boundaries were selfish. But watching Tyler and Jessica exchange vows, seeing my parents sitting together in the front row of their more modest venue, I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is force people to face reality. After the reception, Tyler found me by the parking lot. "Rooney," he said, looking sheepish. "I owe you an apology, too." "What for?" "For taking you for granted. For assuming your life was less important than mine. For never considering what all of this cost you." I hugged my little brother, feeling some of the tension between us finally ease. "I love you, Tyler," I said. "I always will. But I won't be your family's unlimited safety net anymore." "I understand," he said. "And I respect that." As I drove home that evening to my quiet, organized apartment, my space, my sanctuary, my life reclaimed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. My parents found their footing in their new apartment and learned to live within their actual means. Tyler and Jessica settled into married life with a more realistic understanding of finances and family boundaries. And I kept my savings, my space, and most importantly, my self-respect. The next month, I put in an offer on a small house with a garden and a proper home office. It was time to start building the life I'd always wanted, instead of the one everyone else expected me to live. Looking back on my revenge journey, I realized it wasn't really about punishing my family. It was about reclaiming my power and teaching them that love doesn't mean unlimited sacrifice. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices, even when those people are the ones you love most.